Is Venezuela on the verge of a civil war? This is a question that is increasingly being asked as Venezuelans took to streets after the country's electoral authority officially declared President Nicolas Maduro as the winner for a record third term. The fractured opposition came together for the polls. Now, they say that the just concluded elections have been marred by fraud. They claim the election was rigged by an electoral council run by Maduro loyalists, tearing down posters, chanting freedom, and toppling statues. Venezuelans demand the election results be made public, which so far haven't been released in public domain. Before I get in my guests on the show, take a look at this report. Humble beginnings do not necessarily lead to humble humans. A former bus driver, Nicolas Maduro is once again the president of Venezuela. Maduro claimed victory in the country's presidential election in the early hours of July 29th, even as the country's opposition said its candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, was the victor. The country's electoral authorities said that Maduro had won a third 6-year term with 51% of the votes, while Gonzalez won 44% of the total votes. But the opposition isn't convinced. As per the opposition, Gonzalez had secured 70% of the vote and that multiple independent exit polls and quick counts decisively showed his victory. Venezuelans, meanwhile, took to the streets, protesting against the results, chanting freedom and this government is going to fall, as they clashed with the police and the National Guard. The protesters demand the results be made public. Venezuela's electoral authority has not released the tallies from each of the 30,000 polling stations across the country so far. As the political uncertainty continued to swirl, election observers and leaders from around the world urged Venezuela to release a full breakdown of the election results. While the UN called for complete transparency, United States said that it stands with the people of Venezuela.
We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
It was Russia and China that congratulated Maduro for his victory. Despite the country's wealth in natural resources, the population has plunged into severe poverty, hyperinflation, and a collapsing currency. What remains to be seen is whether Venezuela will be able to come out of it or fall deeper into a civil war. All right, let's try and understand the situation that's unfolding in Venezuela a little better. On the show, I'm joined by Pathikrit Payne, who's a geopolitical analyst. I'm also joined by Ray Locker, journalist and author from United States. Good evening and namaskar to both of you. Welcome to Mirror Now. Ray, let me start with you. The contention and the demand that protesters have is that these election results should be made public. That so far hasn't happened. Do you expect that to happen in the next few days?
Happen. I think there'll probably be some manufactured results down to the precinct level. I mean, in the United States, you know what happens in each of the voting precincts fairly quickly. The way this looks like is Maduro is trying to come up with a number that seems remotely plausible on a national level, and then has to kind of seep that thing down throughout the precincts to make it look plausible on that level. And I don't think it is. I mean, seems pretty clear there were at the very least some major irregularities, if not outright theft of this election.
Okay. Pathikrit, how do you see this entire situation unfolding? Here's Nicolas Maduro. He's won a record third term for the next 6 years. Election results haven't been made public. Russia and China have congratulated him. United States have said that they stand with the Venezuelan people who've now taken to streets in numbers that are counted to thousands. How do you see that really panning out?
Good evening to both of you. Shreya, first of all, it's very difficult to identify as to which side is standing on the edifice of truth. You can have you can have to take the truth with a pinch of salt on both sides. It may so happen that there has been manipulation, but at the same time, the issues of foreign interference in Latin American politics triggering regime change is not something new. And the question again comes as to who would bell the cat if at all there is something. I mean, look at the election process in United Kingdom and the post-poll violence there. Look at what happened in France and what is happening in France. Look at what is happening in United States, where a presidential candidate was on the verge of getting assassinated. There has been issues in India also of allegations, strong apprehension of foreign interference. We have seen what happened in Bangladesh. So overall, I would not be surprised that the chaos is gradually once again creeping into the Latin American corridor all over again. There is another aspect to it we must not forget. Venezuela is one of the very few countries whose government is recognized by Russia and China. The Russians have huge investments in the Venezuelan oil and rare earth minerals. That is something very critical for today's world. Also, Venezuela is one of the biggest purchaser of Russian weapon systems. So as I stated, if you look at the chaos all across, today the things don't stand in a way where we can expect United States to come up and say we will strengthen democracy in United States. US has its own problems. We should not blame them for that. I remember what Jaishankar ji stated yesterday, that no democracy should comment on what is happening in another democracy. But the issue of regime change or orchestration, it is very, very difficult to actually draw conclusions by seeing something. You can have certain protests actually getting amplified to show that is a nationwide protest, and the other side may also be absolutely true. So if you ask me, I simply don't know, and I would not judge anything. It happens in many places. In Bangladesh also, there has been allegations by the Bangladeshi Prime Minister that a white man told her that if she allows an airbase to be set up in Bangladesh, then she would not face problems. Now, a Bangladeshi Prime Minister coming up and saying it, it's very difficult to presume that she's lying. So there are multitude of subterfuges in what is happening in the world today. It's not that it has not happened in the past, but now people have started taking these things with a pinch of salt.
Okay. Ray, Pathikrit touched upon an interesting point that Russia is a large investor in Venezuelan oil. The country, of course, we know, has large reserves of oil. Its economy is dependent on it. And therefore, of course, we understand the Russian and the Chinese interest in it. Do you also think that the United States, due to its increased interest in Venezuelan oil, could be also sort of, talking about the regime and the regime change and supporting the Venezuelan people protesting against Maduro in this entire situation?
Well, I think Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, have not necessarily been friendly to U.S. business interests, and that influences U.S. government policies toward Venezuela. It's always been that way. I mean, it's been a major oil producing nation for a long time.
Which is why the interest in regime change, which is why the support for the opposition that Maduro is facing currently.
Well, look, there are a lot of people in the United States who want regime change in Venezuela because Maduro, at the very least, is an autocrat. He's not one friendly to the United States. And so there are people here who don't want him around. I mean, that's really no secret. He's not really much of a Democrat. He's an authoritarian autocrat. So there are reasons to not want him. Plus, we have huge influxes of Venezuelan refugees because of, one, the government's policies, and two, because of the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. Well, it's definitely not helping the Venezuelan economy. People's lives are getting worse, and they're voting by their feet, and they're leaving. So there's a lot of different reasons for it. Some have to do with U.S. policies, and some have to do with the ineffectiveness of Maduro's policies.
Okay. Pathikrit, we can debate on how one views Nicolas Maduro, whether as a dictator, as somebody who's good for the country. But if you go by the past records, we know that since 2014, about 8 million Venezuelans have left the country for better opportunities to the neighboring countries, for better living conditions. You have a crippling economy in Venezuela. You have a dipping currency. You've got hyperinflation. There are a number of problems that are plaguing Venezuelans currently, and that is why perhaps they've taken to the streets, because they thought this is their one last chance for regime change, and that clearly hasn't happened.
Yeah, I do not deny the fact that the Venezuelan economy is in a total mess. They have completely tried to spend everything from the oil revenue. So when the oil prices crashed, the economy got in a mess. And this is a typical communist socialist economy which faces certain things. But and I'm not supporting that. All I'm saying is that it's not that somebody else comes in and they will sort out the problem. The other two issues, as Ray was mentioning about the influx, I have two issues with due respect to Ray. Number one, there are a lot of sanctions that you have imposed on Venezuela. So if people of Venezuela are suffering, it is not without the American interference or the Western interference of sanctions, and because of which many countries like India also suffer because of the surge in price of commodities like oil. The second issue is, if there are influx happening within United States, the Biden administration has all the authority to stop it because it's a sovereign country. The problem is Biden actually wants people to come in, so invariably they're coming in. And this is one of the biggest issues in this election, US presidential election, on the issue of illegal migration. The government of United States can take a strong stand that anybody comes in without the right kind of visa or legitimate papers, he would be incarcerated for 10 to 15 years. Something which when the Texas governor tried to implement, he was taken to the Supreme Court of United States by the federal administration. So I am not saying that US have a
Let me get Ray to respond to this, Pathikrit. Ray, you want to respond to this? The fact that you keep slapping sanctions after sanctions on a country and then you expect it to develop and flourish and make the most of its resources? How does that work out?
In this case, very badly. I mean, it's obvious that U.S. sanctions are hurting the Venezuelan economy. And there have been talks between the Biden administration and the Maduro administration to change things to help alleviate these problems. I don't know what's been happening with them. Obviously, these election results aren't going to help things. But yeah, U.S. sanctions are hurting Venezuela's economy, and we have all these people coming here because of it. And if the sanctions went away, the chances are things would get somewhat better. Maybe there would be changes made by the Maduro administration with their economic policies after that might also make things better. But there's no doubt that U.S. sanctions have had an effect and that they've hurt the economy. And so, yes, in that respect, our policies, the U.S. policies, have contributed to the problems there.
Do you therefore think, Ray, that going further, the role of United States becomes even more important in terms of the kind of multilateral coordination we would like to see to ease out the situation in Venezuela?
Is that for me?
Yes, Ray, this is for you.
I think it would help if there were some change in U.S. sanctions. That would at least get things going and help Venezuela's economy get better. But there would have to be some acknowledgement on the, from the Maduro government that they need to change things too, have a freer, fair set of elections, more transparent policies, and probably end some of the ruinous economic policies that have gotten them in this problem in the first place. I mean, the reason for success from the Chavez and Maduro governments at the beginning was they were spreading the wealth around to more people in the country, which was long needed. But they spent too much money.
Okay.
And then when the oil prices tanked, they had serious problems and they weren't able to meet the needs of their people. I think they need to fine tune what they're doing in terms of how much aid they give to people from oil revenues and do something to diversify their economic base.
Pathikrit, do you resonate with that? The fact is that the United States did ease some sanctions in exchange for a free and fair election in Venezuela. That has come out clearly as not something that is very clear in people's minds. People are out on the streets. They're saying this hasn't been a free and fair election.
So Shreya, first of all, I respect Ray's honesty. I deeply respect it. And secondly, see, I'll tell you one thing. Yes, Venezuela itself is the reason for the mess they have in the economy. There are also strong allegations of their connection with Hezbollah and in the narco terror, entire cartel they are involved. But all I'm saying is that if our entire focus has to be to ensure that people do not suffer, then I think it's important for United States, which is still one of the biggest and the most powerful country in the world, has to actually do some to actually initiate a dialogue. It cannot be my way or the highway. That policy is no more working today. I am not saying that the election was free and fair, but all I'm saying is this: it looks, whatever happens, irrespective of the outcome, country like Venezuela and many others in South America is also getting into a same chaos which Middle East today is in, Western Europe is in, South China Sea is in, and perhaps we don't know what would happen in the United States after the election in November. So I think the world has to be, and we will suffer, Shreya, because Venezuela is one of the biggest producer of oil in the world. So more sanctions, which are already there, that means
Yes.
price of commodities will go up. We don't know how it will impact United States, but
Yeah.
it could impact them as well.
Certainly, global energy prices will be impacted, but we leave it there and let's see how this really moves forward. Ray Locker and Pathikrit Payne, thank you very much to both of you gentlemen for joining us on Nation Tonight and sharing your perspectives. Thank you very much.